Hi, today Armand and I are going to be talking about astrology, talking about the kind of astrology we do and how we got into astrology. So, welcome, Armand.
Oh, hi, Natalie. Yeah, so the A word, we've kind of sidestepped it a little bit there, the astrology thing for a bit.
This elephant in the room kind of thing.
Yes. Well, it's not a it's not it's not something that goes down easy with a lot of folks. Even folks that are pretty open to other things tend to be a little bit suspicious when it comes to astrology. One of the things that I noted early on was that folks that were very much into psychic mediums and things like that, like sort of pushing new science and things like that, doing research, would not give the time of day to astrology. And I thought about that as being really strange. And I was like, I tried to address it with my first book and all. I thought that there was some potential for it. And it really has not changed at all. I think that people are very reluctant to give astrology a second thought.
And with astrology, it's one of those subjects where you need to learn about it before you understand it, and so understanding astrology is about eternally learning it, isn't it? It never stops. We're always astrology students, and so yeah, to be close to it like that, it's often to do with like not really understanding what it is, or not really um, maybe resonating with it.
I think that there's such an issue because with astrology, you have sun sign astrology, and there can be very good sun sign astrology, but there's, the idea that, 1/12 of all the people in the world are going to be having a particular experience on a particular day is, it's asking a little bit much. So I think that people, what they know about astrology somehow
Yeah.
works against the field.
Yeah, I mean, even though sun sign astrology now, it works with decans, doesn't it? So there's different different types of each sign depending on the time of the month that you were born of that particular month. So, um, but yeah, I mean, I can see how to someone who only knows astrology from newspapers and magazines, yeah, it would maybe be confusing for them in terms of what does a professional astrologer actually do? And if you're an astrologer, then why aren't you writing for, magazines, newspapers, or online? Yeah, so let's talk about you, Iman, first. So how was it you got into astrology?
Well, I was never, yeah, I wouldn't want to, I'm not one of like the people that were, completely, anti-astrology or anything like that. I just didn't know that much about it. I met an astrologer back around 1984 or so. And I mean, since a little kid, I was kind of intrigued by it. And then I met an astrologer and I was like really interested in what he had to say. But at the time, there was no way to do well. There were no available computer programs, and I didn't have a computer anyway. So I tried to do a chart by hand. I looked at a book that tells me how to do it, and it was just a disaster. So I just let it go for for many years, and then around 1997, I started to have a bunch of dreams that were there were a lot of symbols in them that I recognized as being astrological or alchemical. And so I wanted to sort of understand the dreams. I was having a lot of vivid dreams. And so uh, I got astrology books to try to learn what this was about. And apparently it was time for me to learn astrology.
Wow, how interesting that through your dreams, you were guided to astrology. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and astrologically, the transit, the Uranus was opposite my sun, Neptune, transiting Neptune was opposite my moon. So then actually when I was learning astrology, Pluto was trine to my Mercury. So for those who understand astrology, that's quite a concoction of transits to be having when you want to learn something. It was really, it's like a revelation, and it came through dreams, and it was a very powerful time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yourself, how did you get into astrology, I guess?
Um, yeah, so with astrology, I was a young teenager when I discovered it through reading a sun sign book, which I found so amazingly accurate. I just could not believe that that it was so accurate that I wanted to find out how to be an astrologer. But it wasn't as though there was anyone I knew who was an astrologer. There were astrology universities, but they were, there's one in America, and I was young and I was at school, and it was a psychological aspect of astrology that I found very, very helpful. I was wanting to get to know who I was. I wanted to know how I ticked. I wanted to know how other people did. And I found astrology a very invaluable tool at a very early age. And, that was the tip of the iceberg. So from there, I enrolled at the faculty. I was doing a distance learning. I used to go on Rainbow 2000 camps in astrology camps in England, and just meeting different astrologers and learning more about it. But I remember getting to that point where I thought, it was on an astrology camp in my early 20s. I thought, if I open Pandora's box, if I really do start to really, really understand the language of astrology, there will be no going back. And I couldn't have been more right, because this is exactly, what's happened. It's like you never ever stop learning, do you, Armand?
It really, that's a really interesting point, because I mean, whether it's my dreams or your experience, there is that kind of, it's almost like astrology picks you rather than the other way around. There's something about the experience of it that just seems to, like it just clicks in.
It kind of clicks and it either happens or it doesn't. And actually, you've reminded me. So when I was 16, I was at this event, and there was an astrologer there, but she was always also a clothes designer, and she looked at my chart, and she did a sketch for what she thought I should wear based on my astrology chart, and it was quite accurate actually. And she said to me at the time, you're going to be an astrologer when you're older. And it really resonated. And I didn't let go of that. That was in the back of my mind, even though, I did many other things before I finally, post Saturn return, at 29, 30, that was really when I properly, cemented into astrology, and I decided to formally study it and become an astrologer. So that was.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by people who really, you learned really early on. For me, when I was a little kid, I mean, I had a globe, and at the bottom and the base of the globe, they had like the signs. And I remember, like, I wonder what these things are. I remember asking my parents about them, and they gave me like a basic little description and so on. And I was like, but it took a while before it kicked in that, okay, this is something I'm going to do. This is something I'm going to like identify with, in terms of career or something like that. It's like a very long time. Maybe even after I started learning astrology, it took probably another almost 10 years before that happened. It's
Takes time, doesn't it? A long time.
Yeah, it's
Really,
very much a learning process too, though.
to feel ready to do that
Yeah, yeah.
work, isn't it, as an astrologer? Um, and
But astrology, it functions on so many levels, right? Because there is that sort of psychological level, right, of the internal dynamics and things like that, or the interactive dynamics. Yeah. But there's also, I mean, like mundane astrology, where you look at things like political events and social things, you know, like the pandemic or whatever, you know, like that's another very useful aspect of astrology, you know. And then there's, you know,
Horary astrology, if you want a question answered, a specific question, there's a horary chart, which is very specific, isn't it? In its
horary is hard. Once in a
yeah.
while it works for me, but then there's electional astrology, where you choose a good day or time to do something.
Mm.
And you know, I mean, I think, you know, like people are very familiar with Mercury retrograde, right? You know, so that's not a good time to do things that have to do with, you know, purchasing electronics or autos, and it's
Or
questionable.
signing a contract or that type of thing. And as astrologers, you see, the thing is, the more you know about astrology, the more it works. Do you find that, Armand, as as you progress as an astrologer, it kind of clicks more and more all the time?
Yeah, yeah. I like to think, you know, sometimes I like to think that you can, and I do think that you get above the astrology. I think that if, you know,
Yeah,
like
definitely.
when you maintain enough awareness about something, when you're really, you know, then the astrology tends not to be, it doesn't push you around.
Yeah,
It's still there. It doesn't push.
doesn't.
But there's still days that I'll have like just a real crappy day, and you know, at the end of the day, I look at, oh yeah, well, you know, Mars was square my sun or something like that. Like, well, no wonder, you know.
Exactly. So, this is what's so incredibly helpful, isn't it, with astrology, that you can understand why things are happening and how long that particular energy is going to be at play. So if you're having a bad day, you can see why you're having a bad day, and by tomorrow you're going to feel better, and it does help you, doesn't it, to understand, to see patterns in things and to have that patience. But I know what you mean about going beyond the astrology too, because I think if you're quite intuitive, you can sense things as well, and astrology really helps to confirm that for you. Um, but I remember my astrology teacher when I was at the faculty in London, and she said that an amoeba is very easy to predict because it's an amoeba. But the more evolved you are, the harder it is to predict in your life. And but because certain people have more of a fated life, like it could be royalty, or you know people who are living within a kind of system which is more kind of organized. um but yeah, I have been asked questions before, like, you're an astrologer, so tell me the zodiac sign of the person I'm going to meet and the exact day I'm going to meet them, and things like this, that because you start to think about fate, don't you? And you start to think about the fact that if we could predict everything, why would we even need to be here? Where would the magic of living be? And isn't it nice to have some choice, some control over what you want, rather than feeling like your whole life is just mapped out and there's going to be no divergencies from
You
that.
know, Natalie, that one thing that I found among, let's say, modern folk, you know, one of the things that they don't like astrology because they don't really see how it could work, and that's a whole other day's work. But a lot of times that they're really rebelling against is the idea of fatedness. They really, you know, I mean, and people want to be free. They want to make choices. And you've already got genetics. You've already got your upbringing. You know, you've already got the biologists and the psychologists and the sociologists all telling you how you're all boxed in with all of this stuff, you know. And then it's like, here comes one more thing to just sort of limit you. And it's like, oh, forget it. But it really is the case that, you know, you do have choices. But I think that, you know, the whole like free will is developmental. It's evolutionary, right? It's not, you, as you go from being an amoeba to a person, and as you
Yeah.
go up the line, as you go up the ladder from that point onwards, you create free will as you have more awareness, as you have, then you
Yes.
get more choices, and you're so right. People that have, in a society that's very structured, or in, like royalty or something like that, there's not as
Yeah.
much free will. And that's probably why they were great,
So much
predictions
free
back in
will.
the day, right? In the Middle Ages, you
Yeah.
know,
So
if you were born to, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to, but if you were
no,
born
no,
to a
sorry.
blacksmith back in the 1400s, you were
Yeah.
probably going to be a blacksmith, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So there's so much choice anyway, and this is one of the beauties of astrology, isn't it? It's by it massively helps you to understand who you are, and once you understand who you are, um, freedom and options become a lot more abundant, don't they?
yes, it's very true. And actually, if you can understand more, then you wind up creating much more freedom. So actually, astrology works
Yeah.
to create freedom rather than fate. What about different areas of life, though? Don't you find that people, like, I find that people who would never ask me about their career, because they're so on top of that, are really anxious to talk about relationships, and they sort of expect that maybe like that's fated, but maybe
But
career,
the
or
other
vice versa.
thing, and the other thing isn't, yeah, and let's talk to people. Let's talk now about how that works. How, as astrologers, as modern day astrologers doing astrology in 2021 is going to be a very, very different experience, isn't it, to being an astrologer back in Shakespearean days, where astrology was like a religion, and things were very, very fated then. Every time there was an eclipse, it was a message from the gods that there was going to be doom and gloom, you know and
Yeah, we've changed a lot, right?
so yeah,
I
yeah.
think that people recognize that. I think that people tend to see, you almost can't think that way anymore. You can't really be that faded
Mm.
about most things, can you?
No, no. And so as astrologers, we work with right and left brain, logic, the tools as astrologers, the mathematical tools, the calculation, the very linear part of astrology, and then the other part, which, on a divinational level, there is some magic, isn't there, to astrology? There is something that, you know, um, is a very, very creative art.
I think it has to be. I I think that astrology is just, it's just an aid to intuition in a way. It's a very structured aid, as opposed to something like tarot cards, which is, a little bit of structure. Astrology's got a lot, but we only have so many symbols. There's only so many houses, signs, and planets. Well, no, maybe now we have a lot of planets, but
We
to,
have asteroids though, and fixed stars, don't we, as well, which they elaborate on the story, don't they?
yeah, oh, for sure. But you have to pick among many possibilities whenever you're doing, whenever you're looking at something, right? I mean, Mercury square to Jupiter. I mean, you could be buying a big car, or you could be talking a lot. There's going to be, you've got to filter it out some way or another. And I think that there's a big piece of intuition that goes with it.
Oh, there really is. And in Bernadette Brady's book, The Eagle and the Lark, using the eagle and the lark. So the eagle is it's the logical, rational side of the brain, and the lark is the intuition. And as astrologers, it's knowing when to use which. Um, and working with the two. And I mean, when I'm doing a consultation with a client, I do often have an image comes to mind that sums up what they're going through. And I know that that's my intuition, which is kind of seeing things in a symbolic way. But I'm more intuitive with my astrology now than I ever used to be, because when I was learning it, I was more in my left brain because I was having to learn all the rules and the language. Whereas once you've done it for a few years, well, for me anyway, my intuition can kind of come in a bit and
Oh, yeah. Very much so. Very, very much so. It is. I think that's one of the hardest things for astrologers, like going from a student to a professional, and then really developing as a professional, is the
yeah,
necessity of working at things where you know the language, but then you you don't stutter speaking it. You let the intuition. It becomes a framework for intuition, I think.
yeah.
or or perhaps that's what happens. I don't know. The fact that predictions, though, I mean, you can't predict what's going to happen because there's too many possibilities. But boy, oh boy, can you come up with a time frame for things, right?
You really can. And this is an amazing benefit, really, of astrology, isn't it? That when you have someone's time of birth, you can be very specific in terms of forecasting, can't you? And timing. It's, I mean, even having the day someone was born, even if you don't know the time, there's still so much you can see, isn't there?
Yeah, no, there's quite a bit. Do you try, when you don't have somebody's birth time, do you try to rectify it, or do you try to, I at least try to guess their
Yeah.
ascendant? Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes when it comes to guessing their ascendant, it can be easier than you imagine because, I mean, the client herself or himself kind of knows themselves kind of well enough to know what rising sign they would be. If I give them the choice of two, um, yeah, for example, the difference between Leo rising and Virgo rising, it's a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Well, signs that are next door to each other tend to be almost more opposite than signs that are opposite each other. So, Leo, Virgo, not Virgo, Libra, they're sort of a little bit, they've got a lot of similarities there. But um, do you find, let me stop it. Do you find a lot of clients come to you as new clients with specific questions, or do you find a lot of people just kind of want a general, see what astrology can do for them?
I find a lot of the time it's clients who want to see what astrology can do for them.
That's interesting.
Until I ask them if they have any questions.
There's nothing like spending an hour and a half and giving out a lot of stuff that they're really happy about, and then finding out in the last 5 minutes that that what they really wanted to know was. So I always make sure that I check for that. I'm sort of the opposite. I find that a lot of folks who contact me have a specific thing that they want to know about. There's some area of life that they really want to know about. They've got a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And you can have any kind of question, can't you? You can come to an astrologer with any type of question within reason. And you can spend hours just on one question. This is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and well, so sometimes I'm like, well, okay, so now that we spent 80% of the time talking about your career, we should talk about the fact that your Venus is being aspected by Pluto, and maybe we should talk about relationship for just a moment or something like that. But usually what people have as their question shows up very much in the chart, right? It's
It
usually,
does. It does, because I find that sometimes that when I'm writing my notes out, with the question, I'm adapting to the question that they have, but it's there already.
Hmm.
It's there in the reading. Um,
There we go. Well, there's our perspective on astrology. That's two astrologers out of many, but that's what we have to say about things. It's fun talking about astrology.
Great, yeah, it's been really good fun, hasn't it, Armand, talking about it, and yeah, look forward to you coming back and watching our next video.